Welcome, everyone, to the 111th episode of Stories of Service, Ordinary People Who Do Extraordinary Work. And I'm the host of Stories of Service, Teresa Carpenter. And today we have another amazing guest. It's one of those moments where it's like, I can't believe I get to do this and I get to have somebody on such as this guest here. But I'm going to introduce to you today retired Colonel Don Christensen. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Teresa. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Now, this conversation is going to be a little bit more on the very serious side. We're going to be talking about sexual assault. We're going to be talking about trauma, harassment, the legal system. We'll try not to get into anything that's too triggering, but I always want to say before I do a show like this, if this is something that's a little sensitive and near and dear to your heart, or it's just not the right time for you to hear this, this might be a good time for you to tune out. But I hope you will tune in. And we're definitely going to be sharing some things today that I think are really important to the military community. And we're going to be talking about the military justice system. And really, if we can make change in that justice system. Colonel Don Christensen, he served as the president of Protect Our Defenders, an advocacy group for people who, for sexual assault, sexual harassment, and other cases for 8.5 years. In his role as president, he appeared regularly in broadcast and print media to advocate for the rights of crime victims, including appearances on CNN, CBS, NBC, ABC, MSNBC, Fox News, BBC, in addition to the New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, USA Today, Time, and Newsweek. During his time with Protect Our Defenders, he testified in numerous times before Congress on the need to reform the military justice system. His advocacy was critical to the passage of the most significant military justice reform in at least 70 years in 2021. He served as a pro bono attorney for victims of military sexual assault and EEO complaints, lawsuits under the Federal Torts Claim Act, and as a special victims counsel. He served as chief prosecutor for the United States Air Force between 2010 and 2014. He served as trial counsel, defense counsel, and military judge for every year of his 23-year career in the United States Air Force. He has served as the assistant staff judge advocate, area defense counsel, circuit defense counsel, deputy chief circuit defense counsel, deputy staff judge advocate, and a deployed staff judge advocate, chief circuit trial counsel, and staff judge advocate, and as a military judge, trying over 150 court-martial and as a trial and defense attorney, presiding over 100 trials as a military judge. He is a third-generation Air Force officer and received his commission as a second lieutenant through ROTC and entered active duty on July 15th, 1991, and he's licensed to practice law before the Supreme Court of Wisconsin. Welcome again, Don.
Thanks, Teresa.
So first off, I always ask everyone who comes onto the call and has prior military service, what inspired you to join the Air Force, and how did that journey get started for you?
My dad. My dad was a career Air Force officer and aviator. Flew 100 combat missions in Vietnam. I loved the Air Force, was very proud of his service. My grandfather was an Air Force officer. My family tradition of serving goes literally back to the Battle of Bunker Hill. So it's, ingrained in our my family's life. My daughter just separated from 4 years as a Army infantry officer. So it's just something that's there. And I can say that, for my dad, me being a lawyer wasn't what he was excited about. Me being an officer was what he was excited about. So it's just part of who I am.
When you started off your journey in the Air Force and you decided to become a lawyer, did you have any particular area of specialty in law that you wanted to go into?
Litigation, criminal litigation. A lot of people go to law school for a lot of different reasons. For me, it was, I really wanted to do criminal trials, whether it's a defense counsel or a prosecutor. There's just something about it to me define what a lawyer is versus writing wills or doing something else. That was really, really what I wanted to do. Excuse me, just one second.
Yeah, no worries.
Been talking too much. The Air Force really does give people an opportunity to do that, particularly early in their career. And so, it was like a win-win. I was continuing the family tradition of serving, particularly in the Air Force, and was going to be able to do what I really went to law school for, which was trial advocacy.
as you started your career, your junior officer years, were there things that you saw along the way? Because you became such an outspoken advocate, and not every JAG goes down this road. And so I'm wondering where that early on spark was within you. I did see the video, of course, from Protect Our Defenders about that the case later on in your career that sort of kind of made you realize that there might be some things that we may need to fix that you could fix better on the outside. But I'm curious, at the beginning of your career, were there some early signs of some things that you saw that didn't seem to be right in terms of how the military law was structured?
Yeah, I mean, I think almost every JAG when they first start, your main concern is, am I not messing up? Am I doing this right?
Yeah.
Do I know the rules of evidence? Do I know the rules of court martial procedure? Am I not going to commit reversible error when I go before a court, a judge or a jury? And so you're really like hyper focused on that. And it's only after you've been doing it a while that you can really step back and say, does this make sense? And I
Right.
was very fortunate that I was able to buck the system, swim upstream, whatever you want to say, and stay in litigation positions throughout my career. Most JAGs don't. And so the more I did it, the more I saw what the issues were. But I would say my earliest was just the oddity of having commanders make prosecution decisions. It was just very bureaucratic and cumbersome. And you could tell the average commander wasn't really comfortable making these decisions. And it was just like, why are we still doing this? And that kind of formed me as I went forward in my career. Is this really what I thought was the overwhelming weakness of the process, is that the guy in the courtroom or the woman in the courtroom isn't the person with authority. It's some commander sitting someplace else.
Yeah, that does seem sort of strange because it isn't like we would have somebody's boss at their work in the corporate world or even in the nonprofit world be deciding if this person gets in trouble with the law, what should happen to them. But that's what we do within the military justice system. We put their boss or their boss's boss in charge of deciding things that when they don't really know. I mean, a commanding officer doesn't understand necessarily all the rules of evidence and how to look at things from a legal perspective or have even the comparison on the outside world to know what those laws are on the civilian sector. So how did you, throughout your career, how were you able to counsel commanding officers to make those kinds of decisions when they weren't really qualified to do it?
Well, it's kind of odd. There's only particular points in your career where you really have the access to do it. Really, it's staff judge advocate when you're talking about the more serious cases. They're the ones who are going to be interacting. Uh, and I would say that most commanders want to do the right thing. I'm not anti-commander, although there's a lot of people out there who think I hate commanders. I don't. I just think, command is a profession of arms. Being a prosecutor is a profession of law. We should have people who are experts in those professions making the decisions. And but there were times where commanders would really make stupid decisions, oftentimes advised by staff judge advocates who themselves weren't particularly experienced in military justice. That's one of the big myths out there that the JAG Corps like to perpetuate, is that all SJAs are these really qualified military justice experts. Most of them aren't. And where you'd really see it was decisions on pretrial agreements, whether to accept or deny it. Just a lot of bad decisions, a lot of arrogance behind that decision to prosecute or not. The lack of understanding that as you prepare for trial, things change. And so you would say to command, hey, we can't prove this charge anymore. And sometimes you get this attitude, well, we've come this far, go ahead and prove it. Okay, well, key witnesses have dropped out. We've discovered something. Whatever it is, we can no longer prove it. Or we really need to add a charge. It's really important, but that's going to delay us. No, I don't want to delay. And so you go forward, you don't have that charge, and you lose the whole case. But, just generally commanders are going to do what the JAG says. And so it's really important. The JAGs also be highly qualified, but experience within the JAG Corps when it comes to actual trials is very, very limited.
Right, because most things don't end up in a trial, right?
Well, so if you look at the Air Force, my service, like we have like, and I still say we have over 1,300 JAGs. Last year they did 300 courts. Of those, maybe, and this would be a stretch to say it, 80 were fully litigated. And of those, probably only 40 or 50 were before a jury. And you have 1,300 JAGs. Now, they're all not doing courts, but they all, JAG Corps wants you to believe they're all military justice experts. It's impossible. There's just not enough time in trial to do that. So, it works out. If you look at just captains and majors, the people who are doing most of the trials, that's still around 700, 800 captains and majors. And all of those aren't in litigation billets or base billets, but that's hardly any courts per JAG. Even if you break it down to say, okay, these are the people, their day-to-day job is to do trials, the people at the base, people at circuit jobs, it still works out to less than a court a year. And you just can't get the experience and expertise when you're doing so few courts.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it really points to a bigger problem, as you said, about whether or not the commanding officer should be the one that decides these kinds of cases. And so tell me a little bit about how this all got started with, it used to be that sexual assault, and I think it's rape, domestic violence, some cases of domestic violence used to be in the hands of commanding officers to decide whether or not they would go to court-martial, correct?
Correct.
And then now it is out of their hands. But that has been a 20-year slog, I think, from when people saw this problem to where we are today, correct?
Yeah. You could say it's been a 20-year slog, or you could say it's been a 200-year slog. So the military justice system has always been under pressure to reform, and the military has always resisted that pressure. I would say for the first 200 years of our country, the pressure to reform was because it was viewed, properly so, as incredibly abusive to service members, those accused of crimes. So, for example, in 1960, there were over 40,000 courts-martial. None of those court-martials had a judge preside over them because we didn't have judges. There was barely an appellate court system. The appellate court system didn't start till 1950. There was a point up until 1920 that commanders, what we call convenient authorities, if they didn't like the verdict, they could send it back to the court and say, keep deliberating, even if it was a not guilty verdict. So same with sentences. We don't like the sentence, keep deliberating. And so not a fair system. And so for 200 years, there was an understanding this was really an ugly process. And then it wasn't until really Tailhook in 1991 that we started getting the idea that, yeah, it's also not fair to victims. It can be both, not fair to accused and fair to victims at the same time. But it's been scandal after scandal that has kept highlighting the problem of sexual assault and sexual harassment. Tailhook, Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Air Force Academy in 2003, Lackland in 2011, 2012, the Naval Academy in 2013, the case I prosecuted, Wilkerson case in 2013. And then the data has been there. It has just shown that the numbers are horrible. So the most recent survey estimate is about 36,000 sexual assault victims, and you're looking at maybe 100 people getting convicted. So all of that brought together is like, we need to change. And just to be clear, it still hasn't actually gone into effect. It's not until December 27th, really, that this new process goes into effect. And it's only for crimes committed after that date. I think that was a massive mistake on Congress's part. So if somebody is raped today, and they don't report it for 10 years, it's going to be under the old process.
Wow. Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Why do you think it's taken so long for the military to make this change. I think, like you say, we have good people, we have good commanding officers. We try to recruit people that are good, good leaders. What do you think the resistance to this making this system fair has been?
I think it's a couple things. There's a dogma out there that commanders had to have this power. It was just, a truism. Commanders have to have this power. No real deep thought to it. And our allies had done away with, most of them had done away with this decades ago. And then leadership would say, oh, yeah, but they're different. We're the
Hmm.
United States. They're Britain. Well, Britain deployed during Desert Storm. Britain's deployed during Afghanistan. They conducted courts martial and deployed environments without commanders being the convening authority. It was really just this we're special, and it's a dogma that I have to have this authority. No real deep thought to it. Why in 2023 or 2015 or 2010 do commanders still have to make this decision? You could understand it in 1775. There were barely courts to prosecute civilians in 1775.
Right.
You could understand why there was a special process, and they brought in from the Brits and King George III. But as we progressed, and there have been times in our history where we said, yeah, wait a minute, courts martial really aren't the right vehicle to do this. So from 1920 until 1951, basically, by law, the military was prohibited from prosecuting rape cases. It had to be done by civilian authorities. So this isn't new that we understand that there are problems. The other problem, though, is besides this dogma pushing back against change, is that I think there's a culture of disbelief within the military, particularly among leadership, that this is a problem. They see the numbers, but they really don't believe it. It's like, oh yeah, this, and you'll
Hmm.
see people discount. Oh, it's like getting slapped on the butt. That's not what these are. These are actual allegations, or through the survey, something that would be an allegation of a sexual assault or rape. It's not some minor misconduct. It's not, as I've heard generals say this, oh, they look at you the wrong way, or you look at them the wrong way, that turns into a sexual assault. No, that's offensive. So there's this culture of disbelief. And then I can add a third thing. Uh, Understandably so, the military is team oriented, and there is this concept you support every team member. No man left behind, no woman left behind. Makes sense. But the counterbalance of that is when a team member does something destructive to the team, they have to be held accountable. But we've elevated this unfettered loyalty to our team members
At all costs.
above accountability. And so, something you just see is the rallying around the accused, and
Mhm.
that makes it very difficult.
And I think too, the sense that I get is that commanders just want to worry about being in command. That's just something for their JAG to worry about, or that's just something for the investigating officer to deal with. And so what you're having investigations. I mean, even at the administration level, I've dealt with a lot of uh, cases in my show about people who've been really wronged by the command investigation system. They don't get to pick who their witnesses are. They get all these delay after delay after delay, and then if they try to get more help, that's when their case gets even more delayed. Um,
Yeah. The command direct investigation process is incredibly broken. The Army always calls it 15-6 process. It is people who aren't experienced prosecutors, experienced investigators, investigating sometimes very complex things, not used to making determinations on credibility. It's again, we want to think when we talk to people, they're telling us the truth. So they have a hard time calling liars liars. And you particularly see that with the IGs when they're looking at misconduct by general officers and admirals. And it's clear, 100% clear, this admiral has just lied to them. They still won't call it a lie. It's just very difficult for them to do it. So you want really good investigators, but the 15-6 process, command direct investigation process, can destroy careers, whether you're the person the subject of it or you're the person who's brought forth a complaint that is now being handled this way. And command is given so much discretion on these things that are sub court martial and so little due process. And that's really a lot of abuse does occur in that area.
It does. So, how do you think, though, that the military can get their arms around some of these issues without expanding all these new resources, or how much? I think that's also the issue here is that, when I tell people that, I've looked into some of these issues, they'll tell me, well, where are we going to get the resources for all these, outside investigators, or where are we going to get all these people to now be prosecutors and judges outside of the chain of command? What is your answer when detractors say that to you? I'm sure they say the same thing.
Yeah, well, we heard that a lot on the Hill when we were fighting for the legislation. And the military did what I call some back of the envelope math, where they fed it to Lindsey Graham, and it's like, oh, we're going to have to hire 600 new prosecutors, and we're going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. That is all BS. People are already prosecuting the case. They're already prosecutors, and they're doing the case. That's not, you don't have to hire a single new prosecutor. This is, if you have a new process where prosecutors making decision is incredibly more streamlined and less bureaucratic. If the military were being honest, they'd be talking to Congress about how we can reduce the JAG corps size versus needing to expand. They all have expanded off this legislation. They didn't need to. But the reality is, like, if you look in the new process, it'll be the prosecutor's office making the decision whether or not a case goes to trial. Under the current process and under the other offenses that are still out there covered by the old process, that goes through multiple layers of command and multiple layers of staff judge advocates, each one of those putting input into whether a case goes to trial. If you get a pretrial agreement, goes up through all that again, offer decision to add charges, decision to drop charges, to hire expert witnesses. That'll go up through and up and down this chain of people, where now in this new process, that's all internal to this prosecution office. Much more streamlined, much more efficient, and JAGs don't have to give themselves legal advice. So right now you have to give legal advice to non-attorneys each step of the way. Yes, do it for this reason, don't do it for this reason. You don't have to give yourself legal advice if you're the chief prosecutor.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. The other thing I'd want to say about it is what the military is really, particularly the JAG Corps, is opposed to is understanding the importance of expertise. So prosecutors need to be experienced, defense counsel need to be experienced, judges need to be experienced, vital, but it's also investigators need to be experienced. And what we have right now is, when you talk about CDIs or 15-6s, that's somebody that command has decided has enough time to go out and do this. But, the artillery officer, infantry officer, pilot, whatever, they're not investigators. And good investigation is an art and a science, and it's not just something you hand to somebody and say, go investigate this and give us an answer. And the final thing I would say, when it comes to numbers, we have the same number of JAGs, I'll use the Air Force again, as we had in 1990, when the Air Force was doing 4 times as many courts. The Air Force was almost twice as big, and it was have still the same number of JAGs as we did 30 some years ago.
So that tells me that we definitely can take the JAGs out of not necessarily out of the chain of command, but in separate offices to do these types of prosecutions and litigation. It's interesting that you say now that everything is outside the chain. So if somebody gets accused of sexual assault and it needs to be prosecuted, what office would it go to then? Does it just go to a separate, like, regional prosecutor's office? How does that work right now?
Yeah,
or how will that work after the December?
Right. Every service is a little bit different on how they're going to do it. So I'll use the Air Force. So the Air Force, currently has what we call circuits. There's 5 circuits: Pacific, Western, Central, Eastern, European circuit, and they have what are supposed to be more seasoned prosecutors. I did that at one time, and those people used to work for me when I was the chief prosecutor. And they're now, my understanding, is going to be part of the OSTC, Office of Special Trial Counsel. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And each one of those will be headed up with a more senior JAG who hopefully has experience. And that they'll be making these prosecution decisions within those circuits. And above all of them is the one-star special trial counsel. That office and those sub offices will be making the decisions. The Air Force sets up well. I don't know exactly how the other services are doing it. The biggest problem, again, it's going to be experience. For example, the Air Force general, great guy. I'm pretty sure I did his last sexual assault prosecution case with him in 2005. He's not he's not somebody that comes in with a wealth of prosecution experience. There were other JAGs out there that did have that prosecution track, but this is what Air Force decided. And again, he's a great guy. If you were going to pick him to be any other general officer, I would have said fantastic choice. But and my understanding is that's the same with the other services. They didn't pick true, wholly experienced litigators for those jobs. And that a lot of that comes down to the military, again, this idea everybody's military justice expert. So they'll say, well, he was a staff judge advocate. Okay, I've been a staff judge advocate twice, and it's not the same as being in a court prosecuting cases. But there's plenty of people who can do this as long as service leadership takes this process seriously and puts people in there and allows them to make careers out of this. And as you know, this idea of military has you move every 2 to 3 years, different jobs, move up. That really doesn't work for litigation.
Absolutely, because they need to have that experience of doing court cases and trials over and over and over again to really sharpen those skills.
Yeah. And we were talking earlier about prosecuting sexual assault cases. Experience is the number one, I think, factor for being able to do it well.
Yeah. I do want to get to a couple of the questions on here that people have. And I was kind of wondering, we were going to kind of go this way too. What is the alternative to command discretion in sub-court martial cases? So in cases that are command investigations, would you propose that we would take all those decisions, even decisions of sexual harassment or decisions of toxic environment? Someone has a complaint against someone. I mean, how do where does it end? I guess,
yeah.
What would.
Yeah. Well, I look at for sexual harassment is moving out. So
right. So that's been
further
decided
down the road for some reason, but yeah, that is moving out. But I would say we got to look at what we have currently on the process. If you talk about an employer, civilian employer, like I use Walmart as an example a lot. So, excuse me, this would be equivalent of the Walmart manager not only deciding whether or not somebody's fired or hired once there's an allegation of a crime or some other misconduct, but also prosecuting them. That's what we have currently.
Right.
All right. Because the military serves both as your employer and as the agency that prosecutes you. All these other sub-jurisdictional court-martial stuff, I would say, is the equivalent of the Walmart manager having all that authority to hire or fire somebody. You want to make sure they can do that because they have a job. They have to make sure the right people are doing the job. And again, most times commanders are doing the right thing. What I think the answer is make sure that you have outside independent investigators, really build up the IG system, really make Air Force, again, usually the IG on a base is an 05 who is either getting ready to retire or getting ready to move on to another assignment, but they're a pilot, a navigator. Again, my dad's a flyer. I'm not trashing them, but they're not investigators. That's not their job. And going to a couple-week course at the IG school doesn't suddenly turn you into an investigator. So get good investigators so we get good results. And the second thing is the vast majority of times people get punished through an LOR, an Article 15, or a GOMAR. They know they did it. They know the evidence is there, and they know what's happening to them is the right thing to do. It's those other cases out there where maybe it's a race-based, gender-based, facts-based, prejudice of the commander against this person, where there's not a real robust appellate process where somebody can oversee this, not the commander above the commander, but somebody independent to say, yeah, that wasn't right. There's a board of correction of military records for all the services that they give huge deference to what the command did, and it takes years to get results. So that's really not an answer. So kind of the administrative equivalent of the appellate courts for people who have gone through this process.
Yeah. I like what you say about having the investigators come in from the outside uh, parties. I mean, in a perfect world, even those investigators could maybe even be within those regional jurisdiction offices, right? And
Right.
and they could come in and like you said, for the ones that are clear cut, where the person knows what they did, that kind of thing. Maybe there has to be some sort of a decision point about which ones would go outside the chain of command and which ones would stay within. And then if the person who's fighting the case wants it to go outside the chain, I do feel they should have the ability to do so, because I think that that's what is frustrating. A lot of the people that I get on my show are people who've been wronged, not so much in the criminal system, but they're being wronged in the administrative system
Yeah.
and within the IG system. And for them to know that there was some kind of a redress, because right now there really isn't. Even if they try to appeal their case, they're sort of just appealing their cases to the same people who've already adjudicated and said that their complaints were unsubstantiated. So it's really not giving them any sense of justice.
Right. And, there's presumption of regularity that the boards of corrections military records look at. And they go to the Air Force or whoever, and say, tell us what happened here. And so we presume what they did was right. And what they rely on for experts to tell them whether it was right or not are the people who did the agency who
Did the
did
thing. Yeah,
the
or
thing.
being accused of
So,
being, yeah.
so you need to have more of an independent, neutral board look at these things.
I absolutely agree. And there's thankfully a few organizations now that are fighting on that front, just on the administrative side. Walk the Talk Foundation comes to mind as one of them.
Right.
With Ryan Sweezy, he's been doing some amazing efforts, and he was a former. Worked in the Air Force IG office as a pilot, aviator, and saw himself some of these issues, and was impacted himself personally. So at this stage, tell me a little bit about, well, I guess let me go back. Tell me a little bit about what it was like working with Protect Our Defenders. And I saw in the video, if you guys didn't get a chance to watch it, you might want to share just that brief story about what it was that had you just say, okay, I'm going to go from being a colonel in the Air Force with all this trial and judge experience to now going on the other side and doing advocacy. Not many lawyers would have made that decision.
No, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. And then again, that's not because they're not good lawyers or good people. It's just, I was the right point in my life. I know I was the most experienced prosecutor in the Air Force when I left. That I was also one of the very few that had prosecution, defense, appellate, and trial judge work. And so I had really seen it, but I had done a trial in Aviano, Italy, where we had prosecuted a fighter pilot sexually assaulting a civilian woman. We got to conviction 4 months later. The convening authority, who had the authority at that time, overturned the conviction and set him free. And I've been doing this a long time. The evidence was there beyond a reasonable doubt to prove his guilt. I know the court members, the jury didn't have any problem finding him guilty. And it was a travesty of justice. And but what was particularly difficult for me about it was that the military, the Air Force, rallied around the convening authority to defend him. And all their effort was defending him. They didn't care about the victim. They didn't care about Wilkerson either. I guarantee that. But Wilkerson was aligned with this general, so that's where they went. Threw the victim under the bus. The general who overturned it didn't even have the guts himself to call her and tell her he was doing it. He made, the local trial counsel tell her. And so there was a lot of media interest in this case. It really shined a light on how absurd the government's argument was when they fight against reform, that commanders were the solution, commanders were the answer. And here you have a case where a court found the guy guilty, a court that he selected, and he overturns it. I was under pressure to support him, to support what he did. I
Sure.
would do that. It would have been the easiest thing in the world. I would have been the hero in the JAG Corps. I could have, stood up and said, oh no, it was a tough case. He made the right decision. Boy, I'm glad he did it. And they would have loved me. But that would have been me lying. And so we had recommended that the victim in that case, Kim Hanks, her name's out there, so I'm not. Kim Hanks, contact Protector Defenders. We kind of heard of them. They were pretty new at that time, and they were able to get Kim the media and congressional access to help change the law. Because of that work, they offered me a position to come work for them. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to change the process or anything from the inside. I knew it had to be changed, and that gave me an opportunity to do it.
So, what was that like over those 8 years? I mean, I can just imagine that you guys must have been inundated with requests and people that wanted help with cases. Tell me a little bit about what that experience over the years was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically three things we were working, trying to get the legislation changed, which, as you described, was a slog. Each year we would chip away, making sure this got out in the media. That's, a large part of my job was talking to the media, but the part that was the most impactful and meaningful, but also at the same time took the biggest toll, was talking to survivor after survivor after survivor who was being abused by the process, didn't see justice. They themselves were being retaliated against. As DOD IG did a investigation in 2016, and as a result of that, it was like 12 times more likely for a victim to be kicked out of the military or retaliated against than it was to see your offender prosecuted. And so you hear that story a lot over and over. And one of the difficulty things is limited resources. How much can we help each person who calls? Way more
Sure.
demand than we had capacity. Fortunately, there were a lot of civilian law firms that were willing to step up and do pro bono. But each time we had a new pro bono attorney come in, we'd have to educate them on what the process is, what your advocacy role is. But it's wins were not as common as losses, unfortunately, and there were people that really should have been helped, and just bureaucracy wasn't there to make sure they got the help they needed.
Yeah. It's incredibly hard, I think, for people to feel like they've gotten justice through the system. We had a few people that wanted to share a couple things with you, and I'll go ahead and just kind of read them. Darren Lopez, he says, I was wrongfully convicted by the military in 2014 and met Mr. Christensen at the Defense Advisory Committee, September 2021. I will never forget it because I introduced myself as a victim of efforts he relentlessly supports from arguably one perspective. After a quick introduction, I said, I am here in the interest of real justice, fair, impartial, and free of unlawful command influence. He replied that his goal was aligned with mine. He doesn't need to tell you why he doesn't. Got the word. Well, I can't read the rest of it, so sorry about that. But I think he was trying to say something kind about that story, so we'll have to go back to that again. And then we have one more question here from Haley D, and it says, are you able to share with the audience the impact these issues had on victims you were in counsel with? I would appreciate a bit more discussion on the human side of this issue.
Yeah, well, it's devastating. I can talk about cases when I was on active duty where, I remember one case in England where, and after the victim case was ended in a not guilty verdict, Again, that was a case where command was very supportive of the accused and testified on his behalf. Um, it, she just collapsed, and she had to be taken away in an ambulance and taken to the hospital, and spent quite a few days in the hospital from the trauma of it. And for victims, and they go through the court martial process, and you always try to make them understand this isn't what the verdict is saying, but it's inevitable that they think the verdict is they think I'm a liar. And the reality is, right now, for example, the Air Force loses about 80% of the few sex assault cases they take to trial. So for each victim, that's the message they take. Well, they didn't believe me. Take away, they didn't believe me. But the others, when they've lost their career, they've lost the GI Bill, they've lost everything they went into the military, lost their value of self-worth. There's so much retaliation. And there was really a problem for a while where the military would diagnose people with pre-existing mental health conditions that came forward. And it was always pre-existing. Why pre-existing? Because now they don't get VA care for that. And to see somebody who, like myself, whose father and grandfather and uncle had served, and they heard stories about the military, and now they get raped in the military, saying, yeah, you're broken and we don't want you, and this happened before you came to us, and you're gone. It's just devastating. You see it in the suicide. We don't know exactly how many suicides are sexual assault related, but we do definitely know there's significant numbers of suicides where the victim had reported being sexually assaulted and suffered retaliation from the military, the disbelief culture I talked about from the military, called names on social media. It's just devastating. And, one of the things that I've always been really frustrated by the military when they talk about retaliation, they always try to downplay it. Every 2 years, the military does a survey of the force to get an idea of what the retaliation problem is like for those who report. And the military will say, oh, this is like being defriended on Facebook. Okay, it's not. That's not what we're talking about. But if you're a young airman in Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota, and it's January, and you report a rape, and now no one will eat with you. No one will, when you go to the commissary, people look at you. When you go back to your dorm room, no one will talk to you. Or they're saying things about you being a whore or whatever that they often do. When you go to work, no one will talk to you. Your entire life revolves around this little Air Force base, 20 miles from a little town. And it's January, and the sun goes down at 4 and comes up at 10:30. You're isolated, and that's what so many people go through.
Yeah, it's very, very unfortunate. And when I do these shows, I'm just absolutely devastated at the things that I hear. And I think one of the biggest challenges with sexual assault or rape is the burden of proof. And I think we talked about that before the call, is the idea that many times when these kinds of things happen, it really does just rely on the credibility of the victim, or who that they told, and then who the witnesses would have been. How are people supposed to fight those kinds of issues? Like, if this legitimately happens and you don't have proof, what is it that you do?
Well, let's always start with the fact that the victim's voice is proof. Now, the question is it going to be sufficient proof to get beyond reasonable doubt that a victim or a survivor, however you want to say it, coming forward, whether male or female or man or woman, comes forward and says, I was sexually assaulted, that is evidence. If they take a stand and say, I was sexually assaulted, that was evidence. You'll hear a lot of people say, there's no evidence of anything. Well, no.
Testimony is evidence.
Evidence, yeah. In the Wilkerson case, his defenders kept saying, there's no evidence of anything wrong. Well, no, there was evidence. She took a stand and said he did this. That's evidence. And the problem, one, comes to experience. Okay, it's very easy to discount survivors when they come forward and say something, because a lot of times what they're saying doesn't come across as logical if you haven't done these cases before, because counterintuitive behavior, things that somebody who's been through trauma will do. So if somebody hasn't got a lot of experience in sexual assault, they always view it as somebody jumping out of the bush. There's a fight. There's going to be bruises. There's going to be
Right.
DNA. Understanding a lot of times that most of the times those things aren't going to be there. Most of the times survivors freeze during this, and so there isn't this thrashing and fighting, the kicking that people want. There's not going to be the bruises. DNA evidence may be found, but for example, unless there's an ejaculation, it's almost impossible to recover DNA through vaginal swabs. And so, people often say, well, there's no DNA. All right. So you have to be able to get across to court members that this is what your expectation should be in this trial. You have a witness that the law recognizes. The witness's testimony alone, one witness, even discounted by other witnesses, is sufficient if you believe that witness beyond a reasonable doubt to convict. So you really talk about credibility. Why should you believe this witness is credible? What is it about this? And the defense is going to be throwing things to sack credibility. How do you deflect that? So one of the defense common tactic is it was regret sex. Okay, she didn't want her husband to find out.
Sure.
Well, the only way her husband found out is because she came forward. If she doesn't say anything, husband never finds out. In most cases, some cases, that's not the case. Or she didn't want to get in trouble for underage drinking. Well, the only reason anybody knows she's underage drinking is because she came forward. So, just got to deflect these attacks on credibility. Also look at what the accused actions are. There was a Navy civilian attorney that I met one time at a course. It really changed my perspective on this. And she said, we need to be offender focused. What did he do? We're always talking about what the witness survivor did. What did she do? But what did the perpetrator do? What was he doing? Why did he say the things he said? Why was he doing whatever it was he was doing? Focus on what he was doing both before, during, and after, and a lot of times after. So, for example, if in the Wilkerson case, the defense made a big deal out of the fact during his 2-hour OSI interview, kept saying he didn't do it. All right. But what else was he saying? If you just focus on those words, he didn't do it. That's pretty easy. That's all we're going to focus on. Take stand, I didn't do it. Okay, we're done. All right. But what else did you say? What excuses were you making up? What were you saying happened that other witnesses weren't saying happened? And really focus on that credibility. And again, that just comes from experience.
I was going to say, this is investigation 101. I mean, this is really getting into the weeds of people's statements, taking good witness statements, getting all sides to the story, putting witnesses on the stand that can give the full picture. And that just takes experience.
It takes experience. And we have the same problem with our investigators as we do with our prosecutors. There are a lot of really great, dedicated prosecutors and defense counsel and judges and investigators, but they're just not allowed to dwell in those positions. And so you just have this constant churn. And, I was a judge one time on a case, wasn't a sex case, but this guy was being investigated in Montana by the Great Falls Police Department, some seasoned cop. And he gives some story about why he has this iPad that he had stolen from the apartment next to him, an iPod, I guess it was, and years ago. And he says, my mom gave it to me for my birthday. And the cop says, all right, what's your mom's number? And he goes, I don't remember my mom's number. He goes, okay, give me your mom's number. So he finally gives his mom's number. Cop, and this is on film, cop goes out into the hallway, calls mom. He hear him come back in a minute later. He goes, man, can you just tell your son what you said to me? And she said, what the hell are you talking about? I didn't give you a damn iPod. And the case is solved. Now, my experience in the Air Force is the OSI agent would have said, well, we'll have to send a lead out to some other OSI agent who eventually might go interview mom. By that time, the guy said, mom.
The guy already got to her. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the kind of experience that, it's like that cop's like, it's BSing me. I've had people BS me so many times when I pulled them over. I'm just going to follow this up immediately.
And it's just knowing. It's knowing how to do that. I mean, it goes back to, like, things about, like, interrogation procedures, that you see. You can tell when you're watching some of these YouTube videos that all of us true
Yeah.
crime people, like
Yeah.
myself,
I'll give
watch.
the OSI credit on I didn't mean to interrupt, Teresa, but I'm
Oh,
gonna
go
give
ahead. No, go
OSI
ahead,
credit.
Don.
I was doing a murder case in Okinawa, and there was an OSI agent, lieutenant, and they brought this witness in to clear him. They thought there's no way this guy's involved in a murder. And 10 and a half hours later, this guy has fully confessed and is driving around Okinawa showing him where he ditched all the evidence from the murder. And it was that agent just had a knack. Unbelievable interrogation, the best I've ever seen. And it goes back to what I say it's sad about. I'm sure it was her last interrogation. They probably moved her off to some other supervisory role where she never did it again.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's so true. I mean, that's the crux of the military in a way. Like, we're all generalists as when we come in, and then we specialize in things, and then this military has this theory that, you're right, we just keep moving from job to job. It's one of the reasons why I specialized in operational public affairs, because I saw, like, if I could deepen into ops and public affairs and just kind of get into this little niche, I could do this anywhere, and I could move even to another region and still do the same things because I understood, ship operations. I understood even, and now I'm doing it in another country on an international staff. So you can do it anywhere once you have sort of the basics. But if you don't specialize in something and go into it deep enough, you're not going to get the depth of talent that you need
Yeah,
to be doing these cases properly.
absolutely. And it's when it comes to the criminal justice system, it's the best opportunity for justice. So like the man who sent the message we couldn't read all the way, if he's not guilty, if he was wrongly convicted, how much of that is based on the investigation not being done right, or the prosecutor not having the right experience to be doing that, or maybe the judge made mistakes, who knows. It really matters. Experience matters. And, it's kind of interesting to me for the Air Force. We talk about currency. Pilots need currency. You don't just put someone in a desk job for 3 years and then throw them in the cockpit and say, go fly. They have to get back current. Well, in the military, that's an acknowledgement that flying an airplane
It's
is
hard shit.
hard shit. Yes. And it's the same with prosecuting or defending somebody.
It is.
The trial judge. It isn't something we have this absurd idea, for example, that we can use reserve trial judges to try really serious cases. And some of them, again, very good because they do that in their civilian jobs. But we have others that are reserve trial judges that their civilian job is, writing real estate transactions. You really need people to do this and to be able to stay in this. And it's like one of the, I think, Achilles heels of military justice is the idea that our judges truly aren't independent. And we say they are, but they all work for the staff or for the judge advocate general. Ultimately, the appellate judges I'm not, yeah, the judge advocate general. The appellate judge's performance reports are written by the judge advocate general, who, if he disagrees with their opinions, has the authority to send it to the Court of Appeals Armed Forces to say, I disagree with my guys that I work for me, their opinion. Can you review it and overturn them? It's just bizarre. So we need independent judges, and there's a way to do that. So if you look at like the Air Force Academy, the department heads get to stay until I think their 40-year point in their career, or 60, whatever age mandatory retirement is. I think it's 60, and then they get a star in retirement. We could do that with our judges. There's only 20 judges in the Air Force, and we really don't need that many. As few courses we have. Let them stay until they get 60. Put them in that position, make it clear that you are independent. You don't have to worry about your ruling. There's no more OPRs unless you commit something that's impeachable, we'd say now. You just stay as a judge, and then when you retire, you get your star. And there are a lot of people who love being judges. I love being a judge. Great job. And, if you would have come to me in 2010 and said, you can do this for another 10 years and we'll move you to different locations, but you're just going to be a judge. Sign me up. And so there are people out there that have the ability and the desire to do this. It's leadership that's stopping them from being able to do it. And it's old world thinking about how careers have to progress.
That's so fascinating, Don. This conversation is so important for me, and I hope for the audience as well to understand the root problems. I think a lot of times we spend time on social media lamenting about this one particular change or this one law that should be passed or this one story of these people wronged, but we don't go into like the systematic things that have happened over time to get us to where we are today. And you brought up such a great point about the academies. We do keep our instructors at the academies for many years. I mean, there's people that have been there for 10, 15 years, and we think those jobs are important enough to keep one person and to keep giving them that same experience. We ought to think about some of the other professions in the military that could also benefit from having the same people in those positions year after year after year after year.
Yeah.
They don't always need to move up and move out.
Right. Yeah. And, Jamie Baker, who was a judge, civilian judge on the Court of Appeals for Armed Forces, he was chief judge by the time he retired. He freely said it took him 3 years before he really understood what he was doing. Mm-hmm. And our judges don't last on the bench now 3 years. They're supposed to, but like I was on the bench 2 years before they moved me. And it wasn't because I was a bad judge, it just moved me a new job.
Right.
Or maybe it was a bad judge. I don't think so. Anyway, I think it was 2017, after the summer rotations, the Air Force Court of Criminal Appeals, the most experienced judge on the court had been on the court 1 year. Everybody else was new that summer. You could not find another appellate court in this country that would say, oh yeah, we're fine having one judge with a year and everybody else new this year. It's because you need the experience of being on there. And so you could, whether appellate court judges or trial judges, you can definitely let them be in their career. And the same with our prosecutors. Look, there's only a few who are going to want to do it for a career. Mm-hmm. But those who want to do it and have the ability to do it should be the people that are leading these organizations now and should be the ones making these decisions. Same with our defense counsel. It's so important, and the defense counsel particularly have the problem of you can make a lot of people mad if you're very, zealously defending your client out there. And you can make a lot of people mad in your leadership. If you're out there, by leadership, I mean JAG Corps, or not your defense counsel leadership, but your JAG Corps leadership or command. And there are going to be, the Marine Corps threw out a bunch of cases because some Marine Corps defense counsel said that I couldn't zealously represent my client because I was afraid it was going to hurt my career. I think they're kind of cowards for saying that. You just got to step up and do it. But you don't want that in the back of somebody's mind. If I vigorously cross-examine this colonel,
no, you don't.
Is it going to ruin my career? And it's true for prosecutors too, but defense counsel, where you really have to worry about it.
What is your advice to people who feel wronged by the system and they can't afford, or they want to try to navigate the system on their own? What advice do you give them?
Yeah. So I guess, are we talking about at the court-martial level, or are we talking?
No. Well, we'll start small, and then we'll maybe ask the question as it progresses to more of a serious offense.
Well, again, every service is a little different on how their defense counsel works. The Air Force has the most robust process. If you're in the Air Force, if somebody wants to do something adverse to you, go to the defense counsel. I think the Air Force by and far has the best defense counsel system. They're going to help. There are very few limitations. Like I think they can help with Article 138 complaints or something like that, which I don't understand why. But other than that, if it's a discharge, a reprimand, investigation, they'll help you. The other services are not quite as robust. I would say the thing to always remember is to look at what the standards are that are out there. And the good thing is, whether you're in the Air Force, Army, Air Force, Army, Marines, or Navy, there are regulations out there. Find the regulations dealing with what they've led, see what it says, see what your due process rights are if you can't talk to an attorney. Um, if it's sexual harassment or something like that, remember there's resources out there that can help you with that. It's on base, the SHARP office, SARC office, whatever. Try to reach out to them, but do your homework.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. How do you like maybe liaison with other victims and other people who
Yeah,
have had similar issues? I mean, even if it's something as simple as going and finding a Facebook group of people that have, had the same problem and have learned how to navigate it. Learn from the people that have already navigated this problem. You're not the first person to go through these issues.
yeah, and the thing that a lot of people, particularly people in the military, in making these decisions, seem to forget is lifelong consequences of when they do take actions against somebody that's pretty frivolous. If yeah, no one asked me what job I had when I was 20 years old before I came in the Air Force, and that job, I didn't do anything wrong, but that job doesn't affect me in any way, shape, or form. It has never affected me in any way, shape, or form. But
Sure.
some 20-year-old kid, I know they're not kid, 18-year-old kid, 20-year-old young adult, uh, maybe does something or doesn't do something and gets wrongly accused for something that's relatively minor and gets a less than an honorable discharge, that affects them literally
Yeah.
the rest of their life. And there is no other job out there that follows you like that for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And sometimes that's um justification and reasoning to seek the legal help. I just always like to empower people as much as I can, to try to do their homework themselves and do as much of their legal work that they can on their own,
Yeah, a
and
lot
then just
cheaper.
which is not easy, but and then try to pull in the legal experts, at the last and final hour when it gets to a point where you
Yeah.
just can't handle it anymore.
Well, and remember that a lot of these oversight things that are out there, like the BCMRs, are designed to be able to do it yourself. Again, you just got to read. All of them have websites now. It's a lot more accessible. What they will and won't review. One of the keys for the BCMRs is they won't review anything that where you haven't exhausted your administrative remedies. So you got to figure out, okay, so for example, I have this letter of reprimand I want to get out of my records. What do I have to do before I get to the
Mhm.
BCMR to get this letter of reprimand out of my records? Did I have to go command like the Army has, and I escapes my mind what the acronym is, but they have this step before you get to the BCMR, like if you get a GOMAR, you have to go to them. And oddly enough, you have to be an E6 or an officer, I think it is, or maybe above E6 and an officer to even be able to challenge a GOMAR through them. So it's know what those processes are before you go to the BCMR, because they'll just kick it back and say you didn't exhaust your administrative remedies.
Right. No, I appreciate that advice. I had some legal trouble in the outside world, had a DUI in 2014, and I was able to get it dropped from my record. And as I was researching how to do it, of course, there was all these different legal clinics that or legal people you could pay and prices and everything. And then it turns out it was a form. I mean, it was a little bit complicated, but it was a form I had to fill out and letters I had to submit. And, it took a little while because of COVID, but 2000 uh, 21 or 20, I think I got it dropped. So it can work to do your own legal work.
It definitely can. Uh, I'm helping a client right now that EEO process, but somewhat similar, and she got the EEO to overturn the agency decision on her own,
Mhm.
and dealing with something else now. But yeah, you
Yeah.
can do it.
Yeah, my mother-in-law, she just got her disability appealed. She was denied disability for a very serious and legitimate health issue, and she appealed it during COVID and had a judge on a phone conference through Social Security
Mhm.
Administration, I think, and was able to do everything on her own. Never hired a lawyer.
Yeah,
It took her a long time and it was a lot of paperwork and a lot of research, but it was worth it in the end. So
yeah,
I always try to advise people to do what they can on their own, and then when it becomes overwhelming, that's when you need to bring in the big leagues like yourself to do these kinds of cases. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you also want to address during this call that I haven't asked you about?
Well, I'd like to, stress that even though we've had major reform, particularly the last 2 years, that the need for reform is not done. There's still issues in the military justice system, whether you're a survivor or somebody accused of a crime, that make it less than a fair process. So, for example, we have the only justice system in this country that does not require unanimous verdicts for guilty or innocence or not guilty verdict. It is the gold standard, recognized by the Supreme Court. The unanimous verdicts are the way to go. And what's important, though, is that it be either for guilty or not guilty, because if the idea behind that is if you can get 12 people to all agree, and as we know in our society how different it is,
very hard,
that somebody is guilty or not guilty, we have a better feeling that that was the right verdict. It's not perfect, but we have a better feeling. In the military, we have 3/4 verdict, you're guilty, less than that, not guilty. If you're an accused, you're like, and you don't know, all you know is it's at least 3/4. And you're like, oh, maybe there's a couple guys on there that didn't think I was guilty, and you're not going to be accepting that verdict, especially if you really believe you're innocent. For a survivor who sees this incredibly high acquittal rate for sex offenses in the military, and she's like, maybe 60% of them would have never voted not guilty, and it was just 4 in a quick vote said not guilty. And this guy's walking, the guy that did this horrible thing to me is walking. So for both sides, it isn't there. So we need to get unanimous verdicts. Congress passed a law requiring there be a random selection to the maximum extent possible of court members, the jury. And the military's answer to that is a joke. It's really no different than what they're already doing. They really gave Congress the middle finger and said, we're not going to do it.
How do they find people to stand on juries in the military?
So again, every service is a little different. Ultimately, under the current process, the convening authority selects those people, and they're supposed to do what we call under Article 25 criteria, which is basically Article 25 of the UCMJ says, picked based upon experience, age, all these other things to be the best qualified. The reality is the legal office usually brings names to a convening authority. It says, here's 15 people, sir, take 10. And they go to, now, that's kind of random, I guess. But what a problem is if a convening authority, a legal office wants to put their thumb on the scale, he can go, especially like at a special court martial, like in the Air Force Base, most wing commanders know every officer at least 05 and above, probably 04 and above. They've sat with them in meetings. They know. So if they got some officer that they're like, I think that guy, I think he's a little squishy. I think he's going to find somebody not guilty. And I want somebody found guilty. I'm not going to select him. All right. Because if he's got this bias. Now, I think most of the time they don't do that. But perception wise, it's a big problem.
And there's nothing stopping people from doing it. And
there's nothing stopping. Yeah. So right now, we've also got now basically 3 military justice process. So we're going to have the covered offenses that occur after December 26th, I think it is, maybe it's December 27th. They'll be under the new system. Covered offenses that occur before that will be under the old system. All other offenses will be under the old system. Now, if you really want to reduce bureaucracy and reduce JAG numbers and bureaucrat numbers, you put them all under one system. Yeah, because I don't know what argument you make that says a commander's not qualified to be making prosecution decisions in a domestic abuse case, but he is in a kidnapping case, or he is qualified to be making it.
It makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense. Yeah. So
Did
this,
when you guys were working on the law, did you try to get it to expand? And this was
yeah.
basically the good compromise that you could make just to get this thing out the door was to yeah.
So, so the legislation that passed, there was basically three versions, uh,
Mhm.
and uh, in the two houses. And I'll just boil it down to came down to two versions, well, getting too complicated. So the DOD wrote the legislation that ultimately passed, and they wanted to keep the number of offenses as narrow as possible. The other real version that had a chance was Senator Gillibrand's version, and she had a much more expansive list of covered offenses. Uh, Gillibrand's version had overwhelming support in the Senate, didn't have support in the House. You know, the way politics works. So the DOD compromise version with streamlined numbers of covered offenses is what passed. The next year, they expanded the number of covered offenses. I think as this progresses, commanders are going to be like, why am I
We don't want
messing?
why are we doing any of this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
why am I doing
Well,
any of
and
this?
there's this whole other office now that handles this, and why is this my business? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And I think we'll eventually move to where we have one system covering
Yeah.
all offenses, but it's taken 10 focus years to get here. And like I said, you can really go back to tailhook on the sex assault issues.
Yeah. Well, Don, I appreciate your time today, and I think that this has definitely been very illuminating for me. I don't think I had thought through some of the root issues with inexperience and just the fact that we don't really have trained investigators, we don't have trained um, prosecutors or people who are used to being in a courtroom. I mean, it makes sense because there's such a difference, even in like as you look in the mass media about the legal community, the people that are the ones in the courtroom versus people who are not. It's a night and day difference. It's a different, almost like a different profession, really.
Mhm.
Like
It
somebody
is.
that does real estate law or somebody that does, I don't know, divorce law of marriage and family. That's a whole nother field. So,
Well,
yeah, it just doesn't make any sense not to have people who are experienced in that particular field doing that work. What is it that you think advocates, people that are, who have been impacted unfairly by the law on one way or the other? Like, and I'm sorry, Darren, I did see the rest of your story, but for some reason on the right, it's just, it's getting cut off, but we'll get to it later. And I did see, thank you both for your time. Great points. Need more support for both sides. This is a bipartisan issue. And it is. I mean, this is an issue that's impacting victims. This is impacting the accused. So for somebody who's been treated unfairly by the system, what advice would you have for them?
well, continue elevating your story.
Yeah.
What's most amazed me over the last decade, basically since I left the Air Force 9 years, is how much the media has continued to pay attention to this. There are a lot of great reporters out there
There
who
are.
have covered this and continue to cover this, and uh, and also people on the Hill. Now there are people on the Hill that like, hey, we passed this, we're done. Uh, Senator Gillibrand's not one of those. Senator Warren's not one of those. Senator Ernst isn't one of those. So there are people who want to hear this, and they want to hear it from both sides. There are definitely people, if you're an accused and you think you've been wronged, there are definitely people in the House who are very much aligned that that's a problem, that the process isn't fair to them, is elevate that voice.
I
Uh,
agree. That's
yeah,
why I have
and,
people on my show who've been accused, and I have people on my show who have been the victim.
yeah,
Because I do believe, like you say, Don, this is a problem that's impacting both sides of the coin. And like you say, podcasts like mine, I think, are perfect places that even if you can't get in front of the media, share your story, go on a podcast, go on social media, talk about what has happened to you.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and you know, uh, be willing to tell that story, which is not always easy to do.
No,
That's one thing we would get constantly called when I was at Protector Defenders, and I'm sure they still are. Hey, we want to talk to a survivor from this state that's had this experience, and we know 10 of them. It's not easy to tell that story, especially in the media. And so, if you're comfortable and you can do that, then elevate it.
Yeah. Well, Don, thank you so much for the time that you took today for this call. I think it was incredibly important. I'm going to go full screen, but I will meet you backstage just to say goodbye.
Okay.
But thank you again, and this is such an important conversation that I know I will be continuing to have on the podcast.
Thanks, Teresa.
All right, guys, let me go full screen. Give me 1 second. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think this was a very important conversation. Once again, we went a little over the hour, but I think it was well worth the time. Tune in next week. I'll have another show. And with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening and have a good night now. Bye-bye.